Well, Corey, it looks like we're getting close to a critical mass, and maybe we should just get started. Interesting time.
All right. We will call the meeting to order at 10:02 a.m. Welcome, everybody. Let's see. We do a roll call.
Yeah, Corey Aldridge.
Here.
Lynn Hellegard.
Here.
Shane Stack. Sarah Cofield.
Present.
Ellen Buchanan.
Annette Marchessault as a proxy for Ellen Buchanan.
Thank you. Aaron Pehan. Jacqueline Smith.
Present.
Chet Krauser.
Karen Hughes, proxy for Chet Krauser.
Thank you. Juniper Davis.
Present.
Donna Galkriller. Ryan Hammond. Jeremy Keene. Ben Weiss.
Here.
Brian Elstad.
Here.
Bynum Jackson.
Here.
Eva Rock. Katie Potts.
This is Vicky Cernich, proxy for Katie Potts.
Thank you. Emily Brock. All right, that's all.
Okay, great. Next on the agenda is the approval of minutes. Unless there are any corrections or objections to the minutes, those will stand as approved. And next is public comment. Do we have anybody? All right, if we don't have any, then we will move on. New business, item 4.1, review and approval of amendment number 3 to the fiscal year 2022 to 2026 Transportation Improvement Program. Charlie.
Hello, thank you all. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and get this presentation pulled up. This is the first time doing this on my double screen, so it might take me a minute because I'm having some issues with how it's reacting. So just bear with me. Alrighty. Alrighty, thank you for that moment there. So I'm here with another tip amendment to our 2022-2026 tip. It is amendment number 3. We have some project cost changes within this, addition of several maintenance projects, and then some sort of project phase closeout adjustments. So for this section, I've included what is shown in the multiple funding sources table and the associated funding sources within that. And these are all project changes to the Russell Street project and associated segments. So within that multiple funding sources table, you will see changes to the Russell Street, Missoula, UPN 41800 project, and that is the project entirety funding section. And that funding change occurs in the Surface Transportation Program urban section. There's been a preliminary engineering shift of almost $18,000 in 2022 for the collection of timely traffic data. There's also been a change to the Russell Street, Broadway, Idaho section of $33,000. And this is just a return of funding for this segment. Within the Surface Transportation Program off system, there is a shift to the same project segment, and this is a construction cost increase of $44,000, as well as a state-funded almost $11,000 segment in 2022, and this is for bid item overruns, including excavation, plant mix, and just general construction materials. And then within the bridge program, shown as a cost decrease in the funding table, it's a return of funds for underutilized, sort of a project closeout that shows a return of funds to that project segment. In the National Highways program, you're going to see the addition of 5 projects. They're all to be funded for construction in fiscal year 2022, and they all include durable pavement markings. I think these are sort of important projects. If you look at the condition of those pavement markings on these roadway segments, you can pretty much tell that it's a necessary thing. So for West Broadway, from Reserve to Madison Street, there will be durable pavement markings, and that'll be just over $170,000. On Orange Street, there will be durable pavement markings from Brook Street to the Interstate 90 interchange, and that'll be $150,000. On Russell Street, for $111,000, there will be durable pavement markings from 39th to Broadway Street. On Brooks Street or US 12, for almost $400,000, there will be durable pavement markings from Miller Creek Road to Van Buren Street. And then on 5th Street, for almost $16,000, there will be durable pavement markings from Madison Street to Higgins Avenue. In the Surface Transportation Program primary, there's addition of maintenance projects on Russell Street, the construction cost of almost $55,000, and this is just another funding segment to support and bolster the durable pavement markings from 39th Street to Broadway Street. And then there is a similar project breakdown of almost $80,000 for durable pavement markings from Van Buren to Broadway Street for another funding section on East Broadway Street. And the Highway Safety Improvement Program is seeing an addition of preliminary engineering costs over $150,000 and an increase construction cost of almost $900,000 for the median cable rail project, SF 189. So lastly, we have a representation in our transit fund. It's an increase of funding allocation of almost double the initial funds in 5339, and this is just an adjustment shown that funding section has a yearly allocation increase. And then for our federal transit section 5307, we want to speak through what is represented there for a UPWP amendment. For a UPWP amendment, there is going to be an increase of funds committed towards Mountain Line's strategic plan, and those funds are represented in the TIP, these CARES funds, through a 5311 sub-allocation within the 5307 funding table of $180,000 for the purpose of planning bus and bus passenger amenities. So John will get into the details of how that is properly represented in the UPWP as a planning process, and I thought that I should share its location here. Within the Transportation Alternatives funding program, we have the addition of path preservation for $100,000. The addition of the school's sidewalks LOLO project, and this is just the representation of an awarded grant And then we have the FWP Recreational Trails Program. And this is a new funding source table to the TIP to represent a grant award managed by Missoula County for the New Meadows Trail System. And it has a preliminary engineering cost of $18,000 in fiscal year 2022, an incidental cost of $3,000, and a construction cost of over $60,000 in 2023. And lastly, we have our public notice. So we have worked to have our public notice out to the public for 30 days through a Missoula legal ad. We made our TIP amendment available on the MPO website as soon as possible, with other notices in the meantime. So as information comes in, we update the information on our website to have the latest available known to the public. And then lastly, I'm going to have Aaron speak to a CMAQ funding request change having to do with the street sweepers leases.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. This isn't really a request at this point. It's more of an update for the committee and an opportunity for some discussion about CMAQ, since we're looking at the TIP, and we just want to put some things out there and get a general sense from this committee on support or general consensus on the direction we might want to head as we bring the FY23 TIP forward this summer. So the first thing I want to talk about are street sweepers. And you can see here highlighted in red, we had programmed some annual allocation of funding for both the city and the county in anticipation of a potential lease agreement to get sweepers on the road, replaced. It's been quite a while. Most of the equipment that we have out there that city and county street departments are using to maintain those streets and help improve air quality are rapidly aging. That lease agreement fell through for a variety of reasons, which is really unfortunate that we weren't able to do that. But we are hoping, fingers crossed, that we can submit a waiver for the Buy America requirements for steel on sweepers. That's how we had previously purchased them in the past, before those waivers stopped being approved around 2017, 2018. We've got a new administration, a relatively new administration. I think there's been some recognition that Buy America, particularly for sweepers, is a barrier. And so we've been working with Vicky and MDT to get that waiver put forward. So I guess the question I would love to get some feedback from this committee on, and what I would put forward is one way to do this, because so much the current equipment that the city and the county are using is really rapidly aging. Instead of having this annual allocation of CMAQ for sweepers, instead in FY23, assuming we get a waiver, programming enough that both the city and the county could buy 4 to 5 pieces of equipment. So essentially condense that 5 years worth of funding into a single year to get some new equipment out there and make sure we have operating sweepers and flush trucks. It doesn't necessarily change our overall funding for sweepers over a 5-year TIP. So, you can see we've got about $200,000 programmed for both the city and the county in each fiscal year out through 2026. We had anticipated continuing that as that ongoing program, but it would mean condensing all that into a single year. So if we looked at FY23 on this table, we're currently projecting a fund balance of about $4.6 million. That it actually should go up by about $1 million, because we'll have a carryover of that million that we're not spending in FY22. So implications there are, if we're investing about $2 or $2.5 million in sweepers in FY23, that's going to put a dent in our available balance in that fiscal year. So we would have about $2 to $2.5 million remaining in our CMAQ fund balance, which is still fairly healthy, and we could get some other work done. But it is, more of a hit in that specific year. Looking out over the full 5-year TIP, it shouldn't really affect our final fund balance, or what we're showing of about $5.5 million, because we wouldn't have that 400,000 in each subsequent year. The other piece that we're not reflecting in CMAQ right now that I'm hoping will help with this is increases that we'll get as a result of the bipartisan infrastructure law. There were some substantial increases in formula funds. We're not sure exactly what that will be for CMAQ yet, but hoping that it's a healthy increase that will get us some more funding to do local projects. So that's one question that I'd love to have some discussion on, of how supportive this committee is with that approach of doing sort of all the sweeper purchases in 1 year as opposed to spreading it out over 5. The other question that I would love to get some feedback on as we start looking at potential use of those CMAQ funds is we have a project. We'll be bringing some projects forward to recommend funding, I think, with the new TIP based on conversations we've had and what we have available. But just wanted to put out there that with the Bitterroot Bridge, or this South Avenue Bridge, we've had some conversations between the county and MDT on design of that bridge and the potential to get a shared use path added to that bridge project. There's currently not funding committed from MDT. Their plans of what will be funded and constructed included shoulders as the non-motorized facility, and I think the preferred design that's in the long range plan and from the county is to have a shared use path there. And so there's some additional cost to get that. I think it's about 200, or rough estimates in the $250,000 to $300,000, and that could potentially be a good use of CMAQ funds to connect the trail system along South Avenue across that new bridge. So that's a potential project. Just curious if there are any thoughts from this committee as we move forward. And then we have some other priority projects that we'll likely bring forward that we've discussed, including a potential roundabout at Toole Scott, or the Broadway Toole California intersection. We've been looking at that. That was included in the West Broadway master plan. There was a project already. There's a project already in the TIP that we've sort of pushed out in funding as we try to figure out what the better solution is. And so we're still working through whether that's a feasible project, but that could be another one that we could get in here reasonably quickly. So, and then I guess the one last thing to talk about related to CMAQ is what we're seeing in some of the federal grants that are coming out right now. Because Montana is the whole entire state, including the urban areas, none of them are large enough to be considered urban for the purposes of those federal grants. And so there is no minimum match required on some of those. So for example, RAISE grants, there's no minimum match. We're also seeing on some of the other federal grants that other federal funds can be used for that non-federal match. So I think with the infra or the urban grant, that NOFO is out right now. I don't know that we have a project that is ready for it, but they are allowing use of federal funds to match the sort of the 20% required for local funding. And so CMAQ could be a really important match on some of those federal grants. So something to just, I thought that's a worthwhile update for this committee as we start to have these discussions and we look at what our priority projects are, that having CMAQ available for filling in that 20% gap on a federal discretionary grant could be a helpful tool for us to have available. So I think that's all I have for CMAQ right now. Just trying, I think we could have the conversation now, on those items. They're not part of this specific amendment request. I just wanted us to have, particularly with the sweepers, because the city and the county are going to quickly be going into budget discussions, and with that large of a purchase that we'll have to be making sure that there's adequate local match for CMAC of sweepers. So I think that's the one that I'm most interested in getting sort of feedback. If there's any concern with having that condensed into sort of a single year purchase. And we wouldn't bring that forward until we have the FY23 tip later this summer. So I'll leave it there for if there's any questions about those things before we get back to Charlie and his the final recommended motion for the tip amendment.
Thanks for that, Aaron.
And I guess it looks like Sarah maybe has a question.
Yeah, Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm curious, what is the typical lifespan of the sweeper? Is it different for the city or the county based on the number of miles that they do? And then if we buy them all at once right now, are we going to need to buy them all at once again in the future? And will we be able to program in that savings going into that next big bulk purchase?
Yeah, it's a good question. And my understanding is the sort of effective lifespan, or well, the standard lifespan is maybe in the 4 to 5 years. I think that can vary, you know, like some of the sweepers that are out there working today for the city, particularly for the city, and I think also for the county, are older than that because we haven't purchased any. And so, you know, I think Mountain Line experiences this with buses, that there's sort of your standard lifespan, and then there's what you can eke out if you need to. And it just gets more and more costly the further along, you know, that those repairs get increasingly more costly, and it starts to become not cost effective to repair, keep sweepers running versus buying a new one. So I think that, you know, that's the first part of the question. Second part of, you know, would we be on this bulk purchase schedule? And I think the answer is sort of yes, but with the caveat that we could, you know, I think try to, you know, maybe we stretch some of those sweepers out for a couple of years just to get on, you know, maybe we're buying 2 or 3 every couple of years. So it's not, you know, $2 million every 5 years. Ultimately, it shouldn't really affect our CMAQ funding outlook because we're not necessarily spending any more on sweepers, although I think those are going to have to increase. We're going to have to increase if we want to fully subsidize the purchase of the sweepers because they're getting more expensive. So a little bit complicated there, but I think the answer is yes and no on that second part.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
And I guess maybe if we could just have, if the general consensus is that is a good, you know, I'll take it on. If no one has any comments to the contrary, that we'll assume we'll bring forward sort of that full purchase in 2023. Again, it's all reliant on getting the waivers. But if anyone has concerns with that, now is we'll still come back to it this summer, but now is a good time to let us know so we can communicate ahead of time with the city and county staff.
Lynn, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just a comment, with the way getting vehicles are, I doubt you're going to get them all at once anyway. So I would make a motion that we go ahead and do the funding the way that Aaron requested.
Great. I don't know that we need a motion for it, but I would agree with Lynn that I don't have a problem with it. I know it's been a number of years. I don't think you've bought any street sweepers in the 7 years I've been here, so it's probably getting time.
Yeah, they're practically vintage at this point, so maybe we'll get more for selling a vintage sweeper. But,
all right.
Thanks.
Okay, nothing else then, Charlie?
I'm gonna open this up to questions or comments around larger tip changes, and if there is not, I will request that somebody recommends a motion.
I have a question about smaller tip changes, though. Isn't there a threshold or a 5 to 10% variance that's allowed within the tip? You know, I see MDT comes back with these $12,000 changes. I don't think that's even necessary. It seems, I know for MDT's bookkeeping, it is, but for the purposes of TIP, I don't think that's necessary to be in there, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, so we do have sort of thresholds for minor and major project amendments. And if there is a minor amendment, we have maybe there's a singular or a few minor amendments. But in this circumstance, we had project additions. And when there is something that triggers a major amendment or qualifies as what we define as a major amendment, we include all of those changes within an amendment process. If there is just minor amendments, which is sort of a rare occurrence, we have a different process of those in which Dave Strohmeyer with TPCC board approves of those changes.
Okay, great. Ben, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I'm just about the pavement markings projects. Are there several of those are on streets that call for maybe reconfigurations in the long range transportation plan? Are there opportunities to get those changes made before the durable pavement markings go down so that we can achieve some of the goals in the LRTP? It seems like a good way to do some much needed maintenance and achieve some goals in the LRTP at the same time.
Mm-hmm. There is overlap there. I will call on one of the attending representatives from MDT, maybe Katie Potts or Vicky Cernich, to answer that or speak to coordination around project redesign and those maintenance projects.
So Ben, what do you have a specific project in mind that?
West Broadway calls for buffered bike lanes. That's a priority in the LRTP. There's there's a few others I think in that list that there are like reconfigurations that are identified and called out in the LRTP as needing to happen. And it seems like before we go and put markings down that are going to last 7 years or more, we should be making the changes that are called for in the LRTP.
Yeah, and I'll note, I guess that, and Jacqueline, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but is something we had talked about this project a little bit during the city MDT coordination meeting a couple weeks ago. And maybe it's worth continuing that, looking more closely at those locations and sort of what potential restriping opportunities there are. And I don't know if that's a conversation that we need to have with Steve Felix or how it feels like a good continued discussion for our city MDT coordination meetings to see what we can come up with, if assuming that there's time to do that.
Yeah, I'm good with that. I know we've had some initial conversations and there was some things that needed to be looked into more before the pavement markings could be changed to a different configuration. So yeah, I think it'd be worthwhile to follow up on those conversations again.
I do just want to add that, maintenance comes to us, not just the Missoula MPO, but all of the MPOs like once a year when they're able to use these funds to do maintenance. So what I don't know is if that would carry over to another fiscal year. So that would just be something that we'd need to be cognizant of.
Yeah, thanks, Vicky. It might be helpful if we could, in the interim, I guess we have a coordination meeting scheduled for Monday, but maybe we could figure out what our time constraints are in the next couple of, as quickly as possible, just so we can try to get on top of it and figure out what our decision space is.
Yeah, at the city level, maintenance is the opportunity that we take to make a lot of these changes, and we coordinate with our maintenance staff and adjust years based on what we can do. It would be great if we have that same kind of flexibility here.
Okay, any other questions, comments on this? All right, I think the recommended motion for this is that TTAC recommend TPCC approve the FY federal fiscal year 2022 to 2026 TIP amendment number 3 as proposed. Or the other one is to not approve it. You want to make a motion? Nobody wants to make a motion?
I'll move to approve the TIP amendment.
Okay, all right, first, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Vicky seconds. All right. Any other discussion on this? If not, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I think the ayes have it. It stands as approved. Move on to 4.2, review and approval of amendment number 1 to the fiscal year 2022 Unified Planning Work Program. John?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Corey. The MPO received a request from Mountain Line to allocate $180,000 in CARE funds to be allocated to section 502 in the UPWP, which is where preparation of the updated transit development plan lives. So you can see here in highlighted in yellow is where they have the line item for proposed activities in 2022 to engage with a consultant to update the long-range strategic plan and comprehensive operation analysis. The update will include the current environmental and financial status of the public agency. The project will be funded in part with FTA 5303 funds, $60,000 local match of $15,000, and then the change here or update is the additional $180,000 in sub-allocated section 5311 CARES funding that Charlie pointed out during the TIP amendment. Further down, just an update here with consultants. Again, the existing 60,000 and 15,000 and the additional 180,000 in CARES funding. And then this is represented in the 502 table and 144,000 difference in the FTA section, $36,000 difference local with the total of $180,000. The recommended motion, or let me back up. This was also advertised with the TIP amendment, as Charlie mentioned, in the Missoulian, and then updated on our website as we received information on this UPWP amendment. Staff recommended motion is that TTAC recommend TPCC approval of amendment 1 to the UPWP. And then Corey's obviously here to answer any questions specifically related to Mountain Line strategic plan update and their comprehensive operation analysis.
Yeah, I'll just give thanks, John. I'll just give you a quick summary of it. We did the last strategic plan we did was adopted in 2018. So our original plan was to kick this off and work on it in 2021, but COVID's really thrown a wrench into a lot of things. So our plan now is to get the new service on the road in July, our service expansion, and then have 6 months of that in operations and before we kick off this next planning process, so that our planning process will be a little more, I guess, realistic, or take into account our new service and what that looks like. And we should be moving, hopefully, out of COVID completely by that point. So we'll begin the process here in the fall of putting out an RFP and getting somebody selected hopefully by the end of 22, so that we can start the process in 23. Any questions? Okay. If there are no questions, then I'll seek a motion to recommend TPCC approval of amendment number 1 to the FY22 Unified Planning Work Program as proposed, or as amended by TTAC. We didn't amend it, so. Do I have a motion for discussion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
All right, Vicky, thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
I don't know who that was, but thank you.
It was Karen.
Oh, Karen. Thank you, Karen. All right. So we have a first and a second. Do we have any discussion beyond that? All right. If not, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right.
Okay. Any opposed? All right. That motion passes. All right, 4.3, special presentation on the Higgins Avenue Corridor Project, review of conceptual design alternatives. Aaron.
Yeah, thanks. And there's no motions on this one, so we don't have to worry about struggling to find someone for a motion in a second. This is just an update. So we're basically just wrapped up our, or are wrapping up our outreach on the current phase of the Higgins Avenue Corridor Plan, which, as a reminder, is looking at Higgins design between Brooks and Broadway on both sides of the river. So we started this project about a year, almost a year ago, maybe 9 months, and are at the point where we have some concept designs that we are trying to evaluate and get public feedback on, so that we can start moving forward with all of the details and analysis necessary to get us to a preferred design, and ultimately get the project adopted. So I'm going to run through, since we didn't have all of this ready for TTAC last month, ahead of our public meetings. We're just wrapping up this round of public involvement, but we haven't really collated all of that information yet or made any decisions. So this is a good opportunity for all of you to weigh in on what we're presenting and give us some feedback on what you would like to see move forward in the preferred alternative. We did present this to TPCC last month, as the TPCC happened right at the very beginning of our public outreach phase, and so they got to see it kind of at the very beginning. But I think we plan to bring this back this month to TPCC just to continue the conversation. And I think any input from this community would be really helpful in their potential decision making in the corridor planning process. So just as a quick reminder, this is a partnership project between the MPO and the city of Missoula. So it's jointly funded in part through our MPO planning funds and in part from the city. Knowing that this is a key corridor for both, and MDT has been a partner in this as well, and helping us review the analysis and think about the concept designs, and particularly as it relates to Highway 12. So there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of competing interests in what we can do with Higgins. And so this is the point in the process in which we get to try to evaluate what priorities are rising to the top, and how do we want to utilize that space to meet our community's goals. So no easy task, but I think we've got some good ideas to work through. So as a quick refresher on this project, the outcomes that we are hoping to achieve in our design of Higgins, and these outcomes come in part through our initial work in the project, but also our long-range plans. The downtown master plan had a lot of focus on Higgins and what it is today, how it can support the downtown master plan, some potential changes to the section south of the river, Obviously, the downtown master plan didn't make any hard recommendations for what we should do with Higgins, but put some ideas out there and basically directed us to do some more work and try to come up with something that will achieve the vision in the downtown master plan and our long range transportation plan, our growth policy, all of those plans. So thinking about all of that, our outcomes that we want to achieve in this process, first and foremost, includes making a safer street. So increasing safety for all modes, all users of Higgins, whether you're biking, walking, driving. It's not necessarily our most dangerous street in Missoula, but there are some distinct concerns around both specific modes and how vehicles operate on Higgins that we can certainly look at ways to make that safer. We want to really look at Higgins as a destination and a gateway that we know from the downtown master plan and other projects that Higgins is not just a travel corridor where people are trying to get from one end to the other, like the interstate or some other streets. It really is the heart of Missoula, the heart of downtown. It's a destination and representative of the character of Missoula. And so that's a unique challenge as we start to design streets. We also want to make sure we're supporting increased economic activity. So supporting business growth, new businesses, growth and maintenance of existing businesses that are operating there, and making sure that people can get to those, whether they're working there or shopping or doing errands, whatever that use is. And then finally, the character of Higgins, again, is the heart of Missoula. There's the downtown master plan was really clear that Higgins should be designed as what they call the postcard street. That there is a lot of desire to maintain and enhance the character of the corridor, not just the transportation efficiency. So again, big ask to meet all these outcomes, but I think we have some designs that will help us get there. So the objectives we have in coming up with these designs include making sure that we engage as thoroughly as possible with business owners and residents, so that we know that if we need to, and we will likely have to make difficult decisions on trade-offs, that we want to have strong support for whatever those decisions are. And we really want to understand and wanted to understand going into this how people engage with Higgins and what their challenges are and where we have opportunities to make that easier. So that means developing concepts that, again, consider the needs of all users, that there are, it is perhaps our most multimodal street in Missoula. Out of all of the facilities around the region, Higgins is by far the most multimodal of all of our streets. We want to improve safety. That's, again, I think just a standard of any project that we can reduce fatal and serious crashes, and we will do so to the extent possible. We want to provide space for people of all ages and abilities to bike and walk, so making sure it's accessible, regardless of a person's age or ability, especially when they're biking through the corridor, which today can be fairly stressful, but also for walking and accessing destinations along Higgins. And that ultimately leads to hopefully increasing opportunity for everyone to access the corridor in downtown Missoula. So again, thinking, what does a truly multimodal street that works for everyone look like in Higgins? So we did a lot of outreach last summer. We're a little bit behind on this project. We had hoped to be at this stage last fall in November, kind of through December, but we wanted to spend enough time to make sure we were doing the right analysis, coordinating with MDT to, with Highway 12 and some of their concerns with what we're doing on the corridor, and just make sure what we brought forward was reasonable and feasible, and that we weren't throwing out ideas that we had little opportunity or ability to implement. And so got a little bit behind, but I think it puts us in a good spot now to really come forward with good designs. But we based those designs on what we heard last summer, which included talking to a lot of businesses. We tried to canvass every business on the corridor to at least let them know, went door to door and talked to someone at every business, or tried to the extent possible, and let them know that this project was happening. So we did that through that door-to-door canvassing. We had small group meetings with a number of business owners. We had some one-on-one conversations. We had some follow-up meetings with businesses that were particularly interested or concerned, and just really tried to understand the dynamics on Higgins. And then we did a lot of work engaging individuals. So we went to farmers market, out to lunch, downtown tonight. We had all of our online engagement and engaged over 250 people, asking them basic questions about how they use Higgins, what their concerns are, what they would like to see improved. And no surprise there, one of the number one things we heard from everyone was around safety, especially bicycle and pedestrian safety, but we also heard a lot of, particularly from those businesses that see what's going on Higgins every day. They're out there, they see the day-to-day activities, that there was really a concern on safety and making sure that Higgins is safe for people traveling it. And I think this might have been, particularly in people's minds after there was a crash involving a bicyclist that was fairly high profile, maybe 2 years ago, where there was a serious injury. Luckily, there were no fatalities, but I think it was a fairly traumatic crash and was fresh in people's minds and just represented that conflict between modes that happens on Higgins. Again, no surprise, parking was a very hot topic that, I think more so than through traffic in all of our conversations, parking was sort of the vehicular topic of discussion, and just making sure that there's not only enough parking spaces, but that we're designing them appropriately. That we received a lot of comments on the parking along the section south of the river. Those parking lanes are really tight and it leads to a lot of conflicts. You get a lot of broken mirrors, side swipes. It's really, really tight in there, and it doesn't necessarily serve those businesses as well as it could if it was designed appropriately. And left turns came up a lot. We heard from both businesses and people traveling the corridor that they really would value the ability to have greater access to Higgins as a destination. So you're not just traveling along the corridor to get through it as fast as possible, but you might be trying to park on a side street or get to some other location downtown. And those left turn prohibitions are both a barrier to doing that and also increased delay on vehicles traveling through. So every left turn that you get at any of those intersections, you are delaying and backing up all of the traffic behind you. And it creates a safety hazard trying to take a left turn across 2 lanes of traffic, crossing sidewalks, pedestrians, bicyclists. There's just a lot of conflicts there, and it can be really challenging to make those movements, and both from a safety side and just accessing the corridor. We also heard a lot of input around public transportation. People really wanting to see improved transit access on the Higgins corridor. I think that was a topic. We even got into some people really interested in this concept that was put out in the downtown master plan about a trolley on Higgins or some sort of streetcar idea, creating more of a like fixed rail type transit in the corridor, and how that could help increase transit access, but also provide some character in terms of having that old sort of historic streetcar feel. And then finally, we heard and had lots of conversations about making sure we're protecting the look and the feel of the corridor. Some of that related to things like sidewalks and pedestrian facilities, making sure that those stay wide and that there is space for signage or activation of the sidewalk, outdoor seating, those sorts of things that create a lively atmosphere along Higgins as a destination, and just being the heart of Missoula, and it's representative of our character and a downtown that is successful. So very reflective of the outcomes and the objectives that we had for this project. I think we're just reinforced largely the outreach that we had with folks. So all of that, including a lot of analysis that we did on traffic patterns and existing conditions, crash data, all of that led to what we have developed today in terms of our draft concepts. So again, just as a quick reminder, as we were developing these, we were making sure each design considered the needs of all users, so that we're looking at facilities that accommodate that wide range of ages and abilities, that we're making safety improvements with each one of those concepts, that we're not just putting something out there to have a design, but those design elements are really intended to maximize safety to the extent possible. And then thinking about those economic and business accessibility and how we're supporting businesses with each of these design concepts. And these are reflected in our evaluation criteria. We have a set of criteria that we looked at and we'll talk a little bit about for each one of these concepts so that we can adequately weigh the trade-offs, because none of these concepts, as you'll see, are going to do all of the things as perfectly as we would want. So there's going to be trade-offs associated with vehicle capacity, parking, safety, accessibility. All of those are elements that we need to weigh those trade-offs and identify what is most important for us as a community and as having this be one of our most important multimodal corridors. So we've separated concepts as we walk through these into two sets. So we have north of the river and south of the river, and we have a number of concepts for each of those. We did that for a couple of reasons. One, the sort of land use context is different on both sides, and so we wanted to be sensitive to that and think about how that might influence the road design. We also have wider right-of-way on the north side of the river, so we have more space to work with north of Bear Tracks Bridge, and that influenced the designs a little bit and what's in our concepts. And that's true south of the river is more constrained, and so we have some different stages of concepts there. We also wanted to make sure we included what we call the no build, which is retaining what's there today, because that is a decision to not do something, and there are trade-offs associated with that decision. And so we want that to be to highlight doing nothing isn't necessarily better or worse. There are trade-offs associated with that, and it is a decision that we have to make. So want that comparison to be really clear, what doing nothing means for the corridor. So there are a number of concepts, and I think everyone on this committee should hopefully be familiar with these, but just talking through what we'll see in these concepts and what that means. And I want to start with the 4 to 3 lane conversion, because this is something that can be sort of contentious, or I think gets misunderstood in a lot of ways. There are a number of benefits to this design. So that's going from 2 lanes in each direction to a single lane in each direction with a dedicated left turn lane. And there's proven safety improvements of doing this sort of change that national research indicates anywhere from 20 to 50% reduction in crashes in going from a 4 to a 3 lane conversion. So there are distinct safety benefits that partially stems from having that dedicated left turn lane and reducing the number of lanes that you have to cross when making a left turn. So you're reducing potential conflicts there. And having the opportunity for signals to have dedicated left turn phases that reduce the conflicts between vehicles and pedestrians and cyclists who are crossing along the street. There is a reduction in vehicle level of service and ability to move vehicles through a corridor, but it's not a direct one-to-one that we're going from 2 lanes in each direction to 1. That doesn't mean that there is a direct decrease of 50% in our vehicle capacity. Part of that comes from, again, separating out the left turning traffic. They're no longer sitting in the travel lane or the through lane blocking traffic when trying to make a left turn. So you get some efficiency there. And just, again, depending on the characteristics of the corridor, it's not as much of a reduction as people might think in going from a 4 to a 3, but it does reduce vehicle capacity to some extent. And we'll see that in the analysis of our concepts. We also have one concept where we look at a bus only lane. This is something that we're investigating on and including in our Brooks corridor study right now in terms of thinking of a bus rapid transit and how can we really emphasize transit efficiency along a corridor. So getting that dedicated bus lane really allows transit to compete much more effectively, both in terms of frequency of service and also eliminating that delay that comes from peak hour congestion and some other issues. And so it's a way to say that this corridor is, a corridor with a bus only lane is prioritizing transit movement and making it as efficient as possible. And then in terms of bike lanes, I think, again, for this group, this is fairly familiar stuff, but just the difference between a painted bike lane, which is just striping on the road, no vertical or physical separation of bicyclists from vehicles, but is a dedicated space. And then we'll have a number of concepts where we have a raised bike lane. And this photo is particularly relevant because this is on Higgins, north of Broadway. And you can see the bike lane is raised up at the sidewalk grade. It is separated from the vehicle lanes by parking. And has a little bit of an extra buffer. So it's creating more protection for cyclists and has been shown to both increase safety for all modes when you put in protected bike lanes. There's some new research that has come out this year demonstrating that, at least nationally, on projects, but also just makes for a more comfortable facility for all ages and all abilities. So you kind of eliminate door zone conflicts and you sort of increase your separation of cyclists from the travel lanes. So all of that out of the way, we'll get into the specific concepts that we wanted to present and get feedback on. So on the north side, again, the first concept, if you will, is just what's out there today. And a number of things to note on this particular design is that you do have the 2 lanes of traffic in each direction. So that is increasing your capacity for through traffic. But you do have the limitation of left turn prohibitions, or when you do have a left turning vehicle, you have the safety issue of crossing 2 lanes of traffic and having conflict with bicyclists and pedestrians because you don't have a dedicated left turn phase. And those left turning vehicles are blocking through traffic in that outside lane. And so you are reducing some of your efficiency of a 4-lane facility. This design also maintains parking on both sides of the street. So you have on-street parking throughout the corridor. And there are bike lanes, but they are door zone striped on-street bike lanes that, as you can see in this photo, which was taken about a month and a half ago, winter maintenance can be a challenge, and you often get snow and ice gathering, debris filling up that lane that makes it just less accessible and less safe for cyclists. Plus, it's a door zone, and we get a lot of complaints or concern from cyclists that a door zone bike lane is not very comfortable to bike in. So some trade-offs here, or some benefits here in terms of movement of vehicles through the corridor, but some limits to the safety and the accessibility, and more or less neutral on parking, that it's not an increase, but also not decreasing on-street parking. Our first concept takes that 4 to 3 lane conversion. So looking at going from 2 lanes in each direction to a single lane with that center 2-way left turn lane. So you get better accessibility of vehicles to Higgins as a destination. So you can turn left onto streets. North of the river, this might become increasingly more important as we look at the front main 2-way conversion. We're increasing our circulation and just vehicle connectivity and sort of the economic benefits that come along with that for front and main, and having those dedicated left turns will improve access from Higgins onto those streets. You also get the safety benefits of going to a 3-lane section and potentially having those dedicated left turn phases. We've seen at Broadway and Higgins that dedicated left was a substantial improvement in safety. We saw a pretty dramatic or a substantial reduction in crashes, those left turn crashes involving bicyclists and pedestrians at Higgins and Broadway when that signal phase was implemented a few years ago. This design also maintains most or all of the on-street parking. So that additional room you get in going from a 4 to a 3 lane allows for moving the bike lanes from on-street door zone bike lanes to a protected design that is very similar to what we would have north of Broadway. So you'd imagine this section looking very similar to what is north of Broadway, and you'd have a very consistent feel from the railroad all the way to the bridge. So you get some added safety and protection for cyclists. We retain the on-street parking. There's some impacts to vehicle throughput, but you gain increased safety and you gain those left turns for vehicles who are going sort of to downtown in general. So some trade-offs here. I will point out that in this rendering, we had this conversation with Kittleson and when they were doing these, that they're showing essentially the intersection design that's consistent with what's north of Broadway on Higgins. But our intention is to do more of a protected intersection because we get a lot of complaints about how those intersections are designed with the current protected bike lanes. And so they weren't able to do that in the renderings, but our intention is to, if this was the selected concept, that we would do a better intersection design for those protected bike lanes to make sure that they're as safe as possible and sort of meet best practices for designing these type of facilities. Concept B is sort of a hybrid between what's there today and concept A, where we would add in the protected bike lane, but we retain the 4 vehicle travel lanes. So again, the emphasis here is on the throughput of vehicles and maintaining that capacity. Also improving bicycle accessibility and safety, but the trade-off here is we would lose, in order to get those protected bike lanes, we would have to remove parking from one side of the street. So trade-off, again, you don't necessarily get all the safety benefits and the vehicle accessibility that you do with a dedicated left turn lane, but you maintain that vehicular throughput for people who are just traveling through the corridor. But otherwise, again, some better safety and accessibility for people biking on the corridor, and you still have parking on one side of the street, and that could be done all on one side or sort of alternate block to block, so that you're providing parking on alternating sides of the street. All right, so something that we've looked at for all of these, and that you'll note in this, is that none of these concepts, so we have our evaluation criteria that include things like biking comfort and safety, economic growth, motor vehicle operations, motor vehicle safety, parking, pedestrians, and transit. So those are our primary criteria. You'll see there's a little bit more detail on our website in each one of these concepts that goes into a little bit more detail, but looking big picture on how we evaluate these, none of these designs are doing all of these things better. There are trade-offs. So for instance, for motor vehicle operations, concept A is going to reduce that level of throughput that you have and sort of level of service as a measure of effectiveness for vehicle operations, but you gain safety and minimal impact on available parking spaces. Same for bicycle comfort and safety. What we have there today is not really ideal, or what we'd consider the correct facility for something like Higgins. And concept A and B both improve that for cyclists. And we think transit improves a little bit in those 2 new concepts, partially just through maintaining better, more appropriate lane widths for transit in both of those designs. So we think we can make it a little bit more fluid for transit to move through that corridor. So again, trade-offs here that we're looking at. We can't do all of these things, but hopefully it helps us evaluate which of these are the more important outcomes and which concept achieves that. So moving to the south side, again, what's out there today, similar to what's on the north side of the bridge. We have 4 travel lanes. You have those left turn prohibitions. Here you have that left turn prohibition because it's a one-way. But at SIG, for other directions, you have typically peak hour left turn prohibitions in order to maintain that throughput vehicle level of service. There's less right-of-way space here. It's more constrained, so there isn't room for bike lanes. Today, it's a on-street shared facility where cyclists are required to be in the travel lane, which we know is, and have seen sort of out here observing that is a very stressful place for cyclists to be. It's not really indicative of being an all ages, all abilities facility. There is also on-street parking on both sides of the road, but that's limited in a couple of ways today. One is the available widths. So it's really narrow. And so you get those side swipes, broken mirrors. It's difficult for transit to get through here because of the narrower lane widths. And in winter in particular, when you start to see snow plowed to the center, there's really nowhere else to put it. That really you're down to about a lane and a half at best in the winter months on this stretch. So really constrained in terms of those vehicle lanes and parking. And then sidewalk pedestrian space, you've got fairly wider sidewalks with that furniture and planting zone available. So does some things. Again, you got sort of maximizing your throughput with those left turn prohibitions and the 4 travel lanes, but it's constrained in terms of lane widths and parking and being able to access side streets and businesses and the hip strip as a destination with those left turn prohibitions. Concept A, again, similar to north side of the bridge, is going from a 4 to a 3-lane conversion, which achieves a couple of objectives for vehicles, which is adding those left turn dedicated left turn lane and providing a little bit more standard lane widths. So we're able to get, more of a 11-foot travel lane that's better for transit, widen out those parking lanes just a little bit so that they're not as constrained and impacting the travel lanes. And again, getting those dedicated left turns allows you to access sort of the corridor as a destination better than you were before. That 4 to 3 lane conversion also gives enough space to do striped on-street bike lanes. So this would be more of what we have north of the bridge today. It's providing dedicated space, but the challenge here is it's still a door zone bike lane, and so there's some conflict still there, but it's potentially an improvement over being in the travel lane. We're also able to maintain the on-street parking in this concept on both sides of the street. Concept B goes one step further from concept A and goes to a protected bike lane. So instead of having that striped on-street bike lane adjacent to the travel lane and the parking, putting it on the outside of the parking, raising it, creating that protected facility that would be very consistent with concept A north of the bridge and north of Broadway. Because of the constraints here, it would require removing parking from one side of the street. And while that is an impact, it is not as much parking loss as you might think, because of existing bus stops. You have a lot of driveways. So if you think about the block with the senior center between 5th and 6th, there are multiple driveways. There is the bus stop that's there. And so you really only have 2 or 3 parking spaces in that entire block. Similar with the block with the Big Dipper, between the gas station, Big Dipper parking lot, Vera Donuts parking lot. I think there's maybe only 2 spaces in that block. So you're losing some parking, but it's not losing a full block of parking on each section of the street. But you still maintain those left turns. You maintain the 2 travel lanes through the corridor, and you get the added safety and accessibility benefit of protected bike lanes. Concept C. So this is the one that is maybe the most dramatic or most different for the corridor than what's there today. And this is looking at this idea of having a dedicated bus lane. And so really it changes here. Instead of that 2-way left turn lane, you have a dedicated bi-directional bus lane that travels through the corridor in that center space. And then where you have a station between 4th and 5th, you transition to 2 bus lanes. This is where the buses pass each other as they're traveling through that single lane center dedicated bus lane. And you have your center raised bus stop platform. So think about the transit center downtown is a good example of what a center median bus stop looks like. And so buses pass here. They're you'll note the bus is on the opposite side. That's so that the doors can remain on that passenger side, and similar to having a curbside pickup. And you don't have to have different buses to serve this kind of route. Would be very consistent with what is being looked at for as a potential BRT design for the Brooks corridor. And so it would be imagining what would it look like if you connected Brooks, BRT, down Higgins and into downtown. Because of the constraints, we're able to maintain parking on some of the blocks where we don't have a station. So, you'll see here, there's parking on both sides of the street north of this bus platform. We're able to keep protected bike lanes on those sections, but where you do have the platform and you're trying to fit a lot of bus infrastructure there, we might be down to striped on-street bike lanes and no parking on that block. We also potentially, depending on how this is designed, might need to eat into some of that sidewalk space a little bit. So you might be impacting the pedestrian space or that planting and furniture zone on the sidewalks. And then obviously you're down to just a single lane of traffic in each direction. You lose those left turn lanes that you would have in the other concepts. So again, this is just to illustrate what it might look like to really prioritize transit through this corridor. And it's a concept. I think there's a lot of variables on this that you could we could potentially change or look at tweaking. But just wanted to put this out there as a concept that illustrates what dedicated transit space on this corridor might look like. So that's concept C. Again, just looking through these criteria, there's a lot of trade-offs here in terms of each of these criteria. You know, concept A, not necessarily the best possible bike facility. In fact, the door zone bike lanes, you know, I think depending on who you talk to, it maybe is not even an improvement over what's there today, because you're sort of sandwiched between travel lanes and car doors opening versus just, you know, confidently taking the lane and only having to deal with traffic. But you know, there's minimal impact to parking spaces. Their concept B obviously has some impacts to all of these concepts have impacts to motor vehicle operations in terms of your overall throughput through the corridor. But both concepts A and B have improvements to safety and connectivity as it relates to left turns and being able to access other destinations. And then transit, you know, fairly variable. Currently, you know, we would consider the existing design to not be very conducive to transit based on those narrow lane widths and parking lanes and just conflicting traffic. So get some improvements through these other designs, both concepts A and B, you know, would allow us to standardize those lane widths a little bit more, make it more conducive to fitting a bus through as comfortably as possible. So a lot to think about there, but be really curious at this point. So maybe just before we go into Q&A, the rest of our schedule is we're trying to wrap up this outreach. We've got a few more meetings and meeting with our steering committee to try to sift through all of this and come up with what we think is the preferred design that we can move forward for both sections of the project. And then our idea is that we have a final concept developed by this summer, so we can do that final round of outreach to get feedback on what we think is the best possible design and bring that back to the MPO and city for adoption in the end of summer or early fall. So we're about 2/3 of the way through the project, but certainly have not made any final decisions yet. And there will still be that last round of input before we finalize a concept for adoption. So I think I'll wrap it up there. I guess what would be most useful right now is if there are thoughts on which of these concepts folks are most interested in, or what elements are you most interested in seeing or most concerned about in these general concepts. So we would take that, you know, both the TPCC to sort of have a conversation if there are any recommendations on how they might want to weigh in, or things that we should just avoid because it just does not make sense in any of these designs. So I guess I'll leave it there and see what folks have to say.
Great, thanks, Aaron. I have one question on the economic piece, on the comparisons. How did you arrive at that, the economic growth?
Yeah, some of that is based on research. So we looked at things like, you know, concept B, for instance, with the 3 lanes, the raised bike lane, looking at other projects around the country that have done a similar type of design in similar contexts. And then so part of our consultant team is Leland Consulting Group, who really specializes in that sort of land use economic analysis. And so they did some comparative research and tried to look at what's the potential and what do we see from other similar designs. And what you see is when you do that kind of protected bike lane and a 4 to 3 lane conversion, you get more economic growth. Or what you see after that, the sort of after comparison, is that you see an growth in economic activity. It's not an impact overall. You might see like individual businesses potentially, but it's hard to tease out, like, was that business impacted by the bike lane, or are there other sort of factors that go into that? But overall, sales growth and economic growth tends to increase. So that was what we did for kind of all of these, is just thinking about how that design might change economic activity based on the best available research.
I want to add that it also had to do with the access that freeing up a left turn adds, and that the general acceptance is that more left turns and not having to go around blocks and things like that would be better for businesses.
And I think the last piece is that congestion tends to be good for business. Typically your most successful economic areas have the most congestion. That's sort of a good economic indicator, not a bad one. That places where you don't see lots of traffic tend to not have much business activity. So.
Okay, great. Thanks, Aaron. Annette, you have your hand up.
Great, thanks, Corey. Aaron, this is awesome. One question I didn't see in the concepts north of the river, any analysis of bus. So just wondering how bus is considered north of the river.
Yeah, and that's a good question. I think we didn't spend as much time north of the river because the buses tend to turn off of Higgins pretty quickly once you get north of the bridge. And so it didn't seem like there was as much need to look at that, what a dedicated space would look like. But I think, we could very easily design something similar, or, if there was an interest in that dedicated bus lane north of the bridge, that we could very easily do a similar design. And we have a little bit more to work with too in terms of space.
Yeah. So it's assumed right now that the bus would just be in lane north of the river.
Yeah, or in a turn lane to turn off onto Front or Main, depending on where those bus routes would be.
Okay, thanks.
Sarah, you have your hand up?
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. I really like some of these things. I already did the personal feedback thing on the online portal a while back. My question is, with the proposals that go down to 2 lanes of traffic with a turn lane, how do you see those connecting with the new Bear Tracks Bridge, where would we keep the striping that's being put on it, or would there be some alterations made so we don't have like expanding contracting flow of traffic? I understand like these things didn't happen sequentially, so there's no way of knowing what you're going to have for funding at a given time. I'm just kind of curious if you guys have put any design or thoughts into that.
Yeah, we've sort of been holding off because we didn't want to, we didn't want to get too hung up on what we're doing with the bridge, but recognizing that space would not go to waste in any of these concepts. So there's a number of things that we could do. It could be, using some of that added vehicle lane capacity, or that the 4-lane capacity on the bridge for vehicle queuing, so that we can make sure we're not negatively impacting intersections, particularly at Front and Higgins. So I guess something I didn't touch on related to the 4 to 3-lane conversion and that impact on the signals is that we did do analysis of each of those. And we did a couple of different growth scenarios. So we looked at one scenario for vehicle growth that is based on historic trends, which is essentially no growth in vehicle volumes, because we really have seen a remarkably steady vehicle count on Higgins for decades, certainly for the last 10 to 20 years. Even the last 10 years over the Madison, Higgins, and Orange Street bridges combined, we've seen more or less no change in vehicle volumes total across those 3 bridges. Higgins has been on a slight decline over the last 8 to 10 years, but again, remarkably consistent. When we go back to look at plans in the 90s and in the 60s, the identified existing vehicle volumes on Higgins are basically what we have today. So that was one projection, is that vehicle volumes follow that historic trend and don't change. In which case, the 4 to 3-lane conversion operates fine, that there's no failing intersections, and we're able to clear those queues in the signal cycles at the peak hour. We also looked at a high growth scenario where we assume that there's a 1 to 2% increase in traffic every year for the next 20 years or 30 years. And under that scenario, we do start to see some impacts, particularly at the Front and Higgins intersection, and some increased delay. And it ends up being about 30 seconds to a minute of increased delay under that high growth, what we're calling sort of high growth scenario. And so back to the bridge question, I think, at that intersection, having that capacity on the bridge to think creatively about how we facilitate vehicle flow into downtown could be really useful. Or, maybe we get really creative about like bus bypass lanes or something and have an ability to use that space to let buses jump the queue at those peak hours, or basically make it a little bit more efficient if we're trying to get 15-minute service. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but essentially we didn't want to get too far into designing what happens on the bridge without knowing what we want to see on either side. But I think that is one of our key points where we're going to have to work with MDT and make sure that we're utilizing that space as effectively as possible. And I'm confident that we'll find a very productive use of road space. That never feels like the problem. So
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron.
Yeah.
Great. Any other questions or comments?
I guess the other thing, maybe I'll just, for those who, hopefully everyone has explored our website, but I do think Kittleson did a really great job putting together the website. So it's linked through Engage Missoula, but let me just share what we've done a little bit, because I do think if you want to spend some more time on it, we've got this really great interactive website that sort of takes you through all of the things that I talked about today, including the background and what we've heard and the different concepts that we're using. But when you get to the actual concepts, we have a lot more detail in terms of how the typical sections change block to block, and some of those specific measures that we were using in that kind of overall evaluation matrix that shows the comparison of the three alternatives. So you can get, and there's a little bit more detail, things like implementation, maintenance. We did look at maintenance as a concern on each of these designs and what those changes might mean for street maintenance, because that's something that we're trying to integrate into all of our designs in the design phase, instead of waiting till we've constructed it and then scratching our heads about how Brian or Shane or whoever is going to be out there maintaining this is going to do it. We also have these cool sliders, which is kind of fun. So you can see sort of here's the new concept, here's what's there. You can kind of compare side to side. I don't know, it maybe is minor, but at least it's fun to play around with. And then we had surveys that are closed now, I think. Oh, maybe they're still open, but we collected a lot of survey data on the website too. But just wanted to show this out. If anyone hasn't been to this website, definitely check it out, because I think Kittleson did a really great job. And this is a good model for, I think, how ways that we can put out information for these types of projects to really allow people to play around with it. And we've seen really good engagement on this website. I think our average visit time was like 8 or 9 minutes, which is really high for a website. I think typically we get like 1 minute to 2 minutes of engagement on a web page, and we've gotten much higher on this. So people are actually there and they're actually spending time on it. So just wanted to share that it's a pretty cool website and worth spending a little time on.
Great. Okay. Yeah, excellent. A lot of work on that. It looks really good. I like the concepts that reduce lanes. That's me. Anybody else have any opinion one way or another on the concepts?
I also like the ones that reduce lanes.
And I echo that.
And Annette, I imagine that you're aware, but we have been coordinating with the Front Main project as much as possible, trying to share information between the two. I know that at the front end, the the two teams were comparing like volume projections and turning movement counts and making sure that they were performing similar traffic analyses. And as designs move forward, where we have things to share, we're kind of sharing between the teams also. So that's something that it's very much front of mind that these projects need to play nice together.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah, we actually assumed the front main two-way conversion in all of our traffic analysis and used the same traffic counts and modeling assumptions. So there's a lot of, when we talk about how these intersections operate, it's under assuming the front main two-way conversion.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. Think there's anything else? Do we have anything else on the agenda? Old business? Nope, no old business. Anybody have any announcements or closing comments they'd like to share with the group?
I guess I have kind of one federal funding announcement. Well, it's sort of I think you're all aware, but we're seeing NOFOs for federal discretionary grants come really fast and furious. And they have fairly short turnaround. Most of them have about a 2-month window from the NOFO to the application deadline. And we're seeing them come like back to back. Like we're already into, the raise deadline is next week. We're already into the NOFO for the infra mega or rural grants. That's like about almost, I think, a $3 billion sort of combined NOFO for 3 different programs. And the indications are that the Safe Streets for All program, which is a new discretionary grant, that NOFO is going to come out in May. And there's a Connecting Communities grant that is likely to come out this summer or in the fall. And so I think we're going to be in this cycle for 5 years of just back-to-back grants. So some of you or anyone who is interested, reach out. I'm hoping in the next couple of weeks to try to pull together, a smaller group to really look through our priority projects and start to plan out how we can, 1, develop applications, and 2, get those priority projects to a point that an application is really easy to put together. So like benefit cost analysis, we should just be doing that for all of our priority projects so it's ready to go and we're not trying to do it in a 2-month window. Any of the design work that we can get done that hasn't been, trying to find funding to get that design work moving, and starting to write, responses to standard responses to merit criteria that I think will be, after this initial round this year, we should have a pretty good idea of what we're going to have to address over the next couple of years. So I think the idea is to have these projects in a good point and really identify where there's overlap in, this project is eligible for these 3 funding sources. And so we're going to try to think about how we pull all that together. So just wanted to throw that out there, that if you have an interest in being involved in that or have thoughts or ideas, just reach out and we'll try to coordinate as best as possible on these projects and maximize our funding, and then figure out how we manage all of those grant funds in the future, which is another challenge.
Sarah, you had your hand up?
Yeah, on April 21st, we are taking a rule package to the Air Pollution Control Board for a hearing. This is the rule package we actually started back a couple of years ago, but then COVID. And there are just a couple things that do impact transportation. We are trying to build in a bit more flexibility with our paving requirements to kind of allow some common sense paving of instead of, paving this really unused parking lot that you want to build, you can instead pave a busy dirt road in front of your business, that sort of thing, to add some flexibility with what gets paved. And then we are seeking to get rid of our oxygenated fuels program. And in order to do that, we need to have a way to remove it from our rules once EPA approves the program's removal. So that's just, it is in there as well, since we don't actually have a carbon monoxide problem anymore. And there isn't really a reason to require oxygenated fuel currently, but it is in our rules until EPA says we can get rid of it. So just wanted to let you guys know that hearing is coming up on April 21st. And because this will be an update to our state implementation plan, I will be bringing it to TPCC, but probably not through TTAC, just because part of the Clean Air Act is SIP updates have to go through the MPO. So letting TTAC know that this is happening.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Any other announcements, comments? All right, if there are,
One more, sorry, I should announce that we're getting ready for the commuter challenge. So Missoula in Motion is gathering groups and businesses and others. So if any of your divisions are not signed up for the commuter challenge, you should, and reach out to Catherine or Allie or Stacy to do that. It'd be great to have as much participation as possible. And it's fun and it's getting nice out. So good opportunity to think about commuting sustainably and doing it in a fun competition.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. All right, if there is nothing else, then we will be adjourned. Thanks, everyone.